something. Thank you. Okay, welcome to the Kuadrant community call of February the 4th of 2025. We have at least 2 items to talk about. The first one is from Guy. He couldn't make it, but he asked me to share or to ask all of you to have a look at that document, read through it, see if you find holes in it, make comments. It's about gateway API policies, like basically the proposal that he has been working on, and it needs some work. So anybody who wants to step in and get involved in that, or just have a read through it, see if it makes sense, see where it doesn't make sense, he would be super thankful. So that's the first point, and there's more particularities in the notes there. And then Adam, draft proposals. I love that. Draft proposals. Go for it.
Just yeah, so I've started to look into stuff to do with meta policies, in particular plans. So myself and Diddy are looking at this. Diddy's going from the point of view of looking at identity policies. So a way that a user, a very specific plan that a user might use to identify themselves or identify their users. And I'm looking at it from the plan side of things, or how you'd use that identity. So I kind of created a draft sort of example of different tiers for the plan. So I came up with this example where maybe the bronze tier is for unidentified users, silver tier is for all identified users, and then the gold tier is for users with verified email and the email ends with a certain domain. And I came with that sort of scenario and decided to see how I could spec up a CR and how that might look. So we end up with this, yeah, as you can see, this plan policy CR. I guess the first thing to note is I opted to go with the target ref targeting our identity policy, whatever that might look like. So this differs slightly from how we are targeting network resources, but I thought as a user, it makes it very clear that this maps directly to that identity. It comes with the caveat that you don't have as much fine-grained control over which resources you're targeting. So I think there's maybe some discussion to be had about whether we should keep it the way I have it right now or not. And the other thing is I've kind of changed the way that we define the limits in the section down below, where you can see the plans of bronze, silver, and gold. I've kind of made it so that it's very specific about the unit of time. So instead of in our rate limit policies, we have 1,000, and then we have a window where you define the as you can see in the custom example there, actually, where you define the unit as well as the period of time. So I've gone for this approach where it's very specific and very clear when you're writing the CR what it's doing, with the control of still being able to access and create the existing limits in the custom field. And then we have this mapping function, which looks a little overwhelming, but effectively we provide a cell expression which will map to the different tiers. The first one just saying it has the auth identity struct and the email is verified and the email ends with my domain, and then the second one has auth identity, and then bronze is just true, it's the fallback one. But yeah, that's kind of my initial thoughts on this. I was kind of hoping we could maybe have some discussion, or if anyone's got some comments on this.
I do.
Sorry, Thomas.
You go first.
It popped into my head there now when you talk about the daily limits, or your limits and daily being 1,000 things. What happens if I'm trying to create a plan policy that's based on a month or based on 28 days.
Yeah, so I guess like 28 days. Well, it depends. If it's monthly, then you just use the monthly one, right, instead of the daily. But you could also combine them, right? You might have a monthly limit as well as a daily limit. And if you needed something more specific, then you just have to look up, I guess, the documentation and use the custom ones with the explicit limits, right? The same way we do it in the rate limit policy. I was kind of thinking about this from the point of view of I'm going to this and I don't know how everything works. Like, what would I expect, and what would seemingly make sense if it was just there put right in front of me.
Yeah, so like the reason why I said like 28 days, my phone plan is on 28 days. It's not a monthly phone plan. It's a 28-day phone plan. So I could see that being
Could
something
be the
that a
custom
user
one,
might.
no? You could have limit and then window 28 or days, or no?
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand it. Like, that's how you could do it, but it seems, I don't know. It seems a bit weird that you're very tied to your units of measure. Like, I would assume that's going to be like daily, weekly, monthly. That's kind of what you're stuck with, or yearly as well. Or are you saying that you can put into custom there as well?
Right. You're not stuck with it. Like, that's what you get. And it's very, I think, in my opinion, clear what we're talking about, right? But you have the custom thing where you can do whatever you want, just as you can in the rate limit policy. So that's an example of leaky abstraction in the sense that there is this, I don't know what, I agree with Adam. I think it's handier to specify it like that. The point is not to say this will cover all the use cases, right? The point is to say this covers some use cases, possibly not enough, and then maybe we should just yank it, right? And then you can go to the fine level details of whatever you want, right? So, which I never looked into, but technically you could have limit 1,000 window colon 1 day and 6 hours and 26 seconds, if that's what you wanted, right? So you can just, you slowly start peeling away the sugar coating so that you'll figure out like what it is you can put in window, right? Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think I misunderstood what that custom was about, or what that commented out section was about.
It's just stuff that wasn't defined because XYZ isn't defined, I guess, but it's valid, right? Technically, you could just comment it out and it just says 1,000 on a daily, say 2,000 weekly, 4,000 monthly, and yearly, I don't know, 10,000. And add as many custom as you want, right? It's an array.
What would the plan policy have as a target graph?
Do you mean what would be the target ref, like the target ref on for this one?
The target graph of this one is the identity policy, right?
Yeah, so that's one of the things.
Sorry. I mean, so my point is, what would the identity policy have as a target graph? That was my question. Sorry.
I think this would be the same as like auth currently. I mean, did he still or did he's going to look into this? But I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm assuming that's going to target a network object of some kind, and then the plan that's linked to the identity would just point at the same network object or affect the same network object. But I guess one caveat with that, I put this in the design decisions underneath, is if you had, for example, different identity policies that were supposed to affect different plans, or potentially maybe you have a plan that's not supposed to have an identity at all, then does this really make sense? Like, should it just be targeting the network object directly? But I guess I was trying to think of a very specific case and then see where we go from there.
My other question was, we want to have cell in the meta policies. Like we want to get all that potential complexity of cell there. Because in my head, like you would not get that power if you want to use cell. You go one level lower.
I'm gonna take that one. So one, cell isn't complicated. It's actually very easy. Like, well, very simple. I would argue it makes it hard. That's the problem. Because actually, so I wrote this mapping function. It's actually broken. The reason it's broken, everybody sees it, is because I'm defining a map, and the iteration order over a map in sensible languages is obviously not guaranteed. So I actually came up with a way to fix this. And if you think that is quote unquote complex, when you mean hard, you've seen nothing yet. So I don't know necessarily. So there's a few things there that I chatted with Adam about on the side. So there's a few things. To begin with is, what is the data set that this function operates over? In this case, it looks like it's the well-known attributes, which is something I would argue against. And I think it should be a very minimal set of input that you can provide inside this function. At least that's what I would default to initially. Because great power versus responsibility, right? Example given, if you feed in the request in there, you can start overriding things again, like the stuff that it targets through the request.path, for instance, right? The set explosion problem that we've been talking about for a while. So you get that. Then, so that's one thing that I would make to sort of make it slightly easier to understand what is going on. Then the problem you have is you can take all the power away from the people, right? Because some data, so what you see there is actually me that made it up. I don't know how, well, we'll see. Maybe I'll pick it up tomorrow. I don't know. But when we start working on the identity policy, I looked into doing something with regards to OAuth and OIDC. And I wanted to integrate it with something that exists. So there's a few things out there that you can use, Facebook and other people, that I thought I don't want to integrate with. So one that I found was GitLab. So GitHub doesn't provide it as OAuth, but not OIDC. So GitLab does, though. And so what you see there, email verified and all that, is actually fields that you get from through IDC from GitLab, right? So that was sort of me steering it that way. So that would remain, but that very specific stuff is actually completely dependent on what OIDC thing you integrate with, in the case of OIDC identity policy, right? So you don't know. It's all opaque stuff that the user needs to express. So what makes sense to operate on that data in order to be able, because all we're doing there is execute a function in order to know whether it's gold, silver, or bronze, right? So in case that isn't clear, what we have is 3 predicates there that will figure out what is the tier that we apply to, and then that maps to the plan underneath, right? So the user is left to do that properly. Maybe we could explode this further and so forth. I thought a single function to me is, again, simpler, but I could see that it makes it harder for some people to reason about. That's the one where you can't really do mistakes, right? It's clear. That's only, if it wouldn't be for the ordering problem, like there's only one thing that can come out of that. It's not open for interpretation, right? So that's the advantage. So we don't know what users want to do. That being said, the whole work of what you see there, so the first angle square bracket 0 that you see towards the end, and then the map on this list that you see there, and it's like, while we're doing all this, is just a way to be able to reference things back, because you can't define a binding in cell, right? You can't say foobar equals something. Right, so I just need to write a single expression, all functional. So I think that's suboptimal, and there's a few things I think that we could introduce in order to make that easier for people to write instead of needing to think in this very, I don't know, functional way that maybe is weird.
Is it, for example, possible that if like, because I like the plans part, because that's what I'm expecting, because I see it's called a plan policy, so I expect that I can define plans. So I understand that part, right?
Mhm.
Could you specify per plan conditions, like that, so that mapping is like split up in three
Yes.
different lines, and they are.
So
You
I
know,
touched
for
upon
example,
that earlier, I guess, in what I was saying, but it was probably not clear. So yes, you
sorry.
can, but then you need to, yeah, but I implied something that may not be obvious. It's obvious to me, but maybe not to everyone. So if you do that, you need to then introduce some kind of ordering and say, okay, what we'll do is we'll fall through those plans, and the first thing that matches is the thing that's going to apply. That's what I was saying with this mapping function there. It may not be obvious, but this makes it very clear which plan is going to be, right? All you need to do is read that stuff. And the ordering is based as the user sees fit and so forth. There's only one solution that comes out of that function. You look at the function, you know it all, right? So I think that I'm not implying anything. It's again, maybe not obvious, but if you read this mapping function, it's very clear. I get it. Maybe hard for people to see that clarity, but it's very clear. If you put it down there, now suddenly you need to ask yourself this question. Okay, but what if 2 applies, right? And then you're like, okay, so I'm stuck in ordering my limits, or what does that mean? Because here you could say I can order them, right? I can say that gold is bigger, whatever bigger means, than bronze, because they both have daily and they have 5,000. So it's obvious. Well, I can write a few plans there where all of a sudden ordering isn't clear at all anymore. And so it is on the user. And then this map is not a map again, it's a list of things, and you need to understand it that way. So there's more implied. And in my head, more stuff implied makes it actually more complex, though possibly based on common agreement and patterns that humans have agreed upon, could make it easier for people to understand. I'm willing to buy that. But all those solutions are more complex. And so far, I think that's the easiest I've seen. But we'll harass Adam to come up with something even easier and simpler and beautiful.
Maybe if we end up with a mapping, maybe we can use a different word there. I don't know. Maybe make it more like plan to this map, plan to, or plan mapping, or I don't know. To make
Plan selector, or yeah.
And it could also, the order, the mapping could also be underneath the plans, right? You don't. It doesn't matter how you write this. Or it does matter. Doesn't. Right.
YAML for the win.
Great.
In terms of the mapping or the cell of it, if the user puts the cell in wrong and it's incorrect, will the plan policy still get created, or do we stop it from going ahead?
Not sure all what you mean with, like, so there's multiple ways that we could do this, right? So I forgot how it's called. Sorry, I'm taking that answer. But there is this, what is it, admission webhook thing that we can build in. And there is many things, certainly in Go, that we can assert about the expression and make sure that it's valid. There's many things that we can do, but again, one of the caveats that I mentioned is this identity thing. So identity email, can you scroll a little bit to the right? So this, everything that follows identity, right? .email verify, .email, and then ends with, implies that email is a string. That's completely opaque. We don't know, right? Like what comes from where and so forth. So you would only know that those things at runtime. And yes, it may work 3 times, and then the 4th it doesn't, because for some reason the field disappeared, right?
Okay, that makes sense. So there's stuff that we can't obviously verify is correct, but in terms of, like, I'm just thinking, if you're creating a plan and you have multiple on the go, and one isn't working, but at least you'll like, we could have a webhook that will at least say that it's syntactically correct per se, and it's not just a broken cell plan to begin with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a few things again that we can sort of, right? The fact that this function returns a string, for instance, right? That we can map to look up a plan. This would return a Boolean. I can tell it right away, sorry, that's not possible.
Okay.
Right.
Cool.
But I can also make this to use, I think, probably message back, protocol buff, protobuf wording. You can write an expression that would return any. So where any could sometimes be a string and other times possibly be an integer, right? And then it fails. So I guess my answer is to some extent yes, and then also no.
Yep, cool, that makes sense.
But the valid cell part, yes, no, I mean, that's just syntax.
Oh, can you scroll to the right again? I'm going to give you an example, right? So auth.identity.email.ends with is valid if email is a string. If email is an integer, you cannot invoke ends
Okay.
with on it. Because
Sure.
email is a thing that I don't know about.
Yeah, no.
There you go. If somebody wrote end with, right, and forgets the S, I can tell them that there is a function that they use that I don't know about upfront. Yes, but if they then use it on a list, nothing, and that thing is not known upfront, I cannot help them.
But if they would type auth dot and then by accident have a space and then identity, you can just say it's invalid cell.
Yes, that does.
That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Right. Hey, Goose.
I don't know how identity policy looks like, but for me, it's mine is in the other way around. So identity is attached to a plan, not a plan attaching to an entity. Because if I want, well, the relation is clear. It's one-to-n, one being the identity and being the policy. So many plans can attach to an identity, but identity. Yeah, I hope this makes some sense for anyone. Adam or Alex, you know what I mean?
I guess like the way I initially looked at this was like you have one identity mapping to multiple plans, but then like the plans ended up being like condensed into like this plan policy, so which contains multiple plans. So I guess I had like the 1 to n being like an identity policy of some kind to plans. Which I guess is that the inverse to what you're saying, or?
What I'm saying is that I create some identity in Kuadrant, and I want to be assigned to a plan because I pay for that. And then Rachel jumps in and creates another identity and also attaches to the same plan. And then Jim creates another identity, but sorry, Jim, he doesn't have money and goes for the free plan. I don't know. For me, it's like the other way around. It's identities targeting plans.
I guess like the way we were looking at the identity policy was like less so identifying one particular user, but more like a more bespoke or specific auth policy.
It's
so
a
something
group.
that captures a group. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's
so everything that goes through like an identity provider, for example, like that would be covered by the identity policy. It'd be everyone going through that, and then you like filter based on your mapping function to the different plans from that provider.
Okay, that will make more sense. Okay, let's iterate. Let's see. If it's a group, will make more sense. Yeah.
I can't quite remember the exact example that he's looking at, but I think it was either like the IDP identity policy or OIDC identity policy. So something like that, like someone can use with the minimal set of configuration to be able to set up your IDP, and it would end up creating an auth policy with all of the required parts.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm just thinking about like the tree structure of it, like what would happen if you just both let them point to the underlying policy, like like not this one targeting the off part. I'm not look. Well, I guess this makes sense in the sense that the other one can exist without this one, right? But this one cannot exist without the other one.
Exactly, yeah. So that's why I opted for this, like targeting the identity. But as I said, there's caveats because there's cases where maybe you want to make a plan that doesn't
Yes.
have identity. But
Yeah.
I just thought that's like another stage that you could go wrong by creating a plan that's targeting something that uses auth, but there is none, or you're targeting the wrong thing and there's no identity policy or something. So
Right.
If it makes, if sorry, if maybe sharing how 3Scale is model, there is one identity model per customer, let's say. So the customer decides whether the users comes from an OIDC or something else. So each user will create something that is called an application, and that thing is being assigned to a plan. So a user can have many applications, and each of those applications can, so effectively a user can generate traffic for different plans. That's what I don't know if that helps, but I'm happy to share more details. I'm not saying we should follow the approach, but at least it's some use case. Yeah. Yeah, Alex.
I don't think nothing of this is necessarily binding in any way. So one, and I don't think it's by mistake, right? This says V1 alpha 1. So the idea again was to come up with something that works that we can then put out there and put testing, right? To battle test it. But more importantly, the target ref thing, don't forget, it's like there, it's the identity policy. You could absolutely make it so that it also supports pointing to something else, right? It doesn't need to be that and only that as an option. I think this raises further questions, right? But yeah. Anyways, I think the way that I try to look at this is what is binding to going down a route versus like what can we test as ideas, right? And this isn't forcing us going down any route necessarily, or again, there are more questions that arise if we do more things. But
Another question I had was like, given that there is custom there in limits, isn't that so clear that, just limit and window, you can do anything you want with that. So do you really need the weekly, monthly, yearly, daily, or not? I don't know. I understand that it makes it very explicit if you say daily 1,000. So it's like, okay, I can get that. But at the same time, I think, well, I also understand limit and window, I guess, or I don't know what it is that we use in auth policy or in rate limiting policy right now, but I don't know. Just thinking aloud.
Yeah, it's the stuff from the custom field maps one-to-one to what we have in the rate limit policy. So I don't know. Like I also was torn to whether it's actually that unclear. But then I also thought if you only had like the spec in your cluster, then like you might have to go look up what the format is for a window, whereas you don't for the others. It's very, very clear.
That is true. Yes. Yes. Well, it's good to have something concrete to talk about.
So just to complete this, because I don't, so again, I think we should consider all options, but I think what I would strongly recommend is we keep on moving forward with this, including the identity policy, and actually try that possibly like as many people as possible with the thing more or less working. We'll see how good it'll be, right? Try to use it, and what can I do? What can I not do? And what are the actual, rather than going to, I don't know, hypothetical land for ages about should we put monthly in there or not? Because again, as I said, this is very little binding, right? Yanking this is probably, I don't know, once fully implemented, probably an hour of work and you get rid of all the daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, right? So it's not like we're not committing with our blood or organs or whatever, limbs to anything, right? But I think using the thing goes a long way. So that would be my recommendation.
Yes. Yeah, I'm still thinking, is it possible to it's very specific here on the off part, right? Like what you're expecting to get back off wise. So it's kind of should that be here? I guess there has to be something here. You know what I mean? Like maybe it should be even more specific. Maybe it should be the GitLab plan policy. You know what I mean? Like then you can exactly know what you can expect, but that makes it very limited use in use. I get that, but how specific should we go? I don't know. Just leaving it there.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know actually. Yeah, I was trying to. I guess I was trying to be precise, but also leaving some room for it to cover multiple things. But I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe it should be more specific. Yeah, Alex.
So it could be. I think what I'm hearing would possibly meta policies at that stage. And let me explain. So maybe the plan policy, I think here would be my question. Would you ask the same question if we would be looking at the GitLab identity policy right now? Probably no, because the GitLab identity policy provides value on its own, right? It's like all of a sudden now I can protect my app of only to authorize access and get all that data fed back into my app, which again, I think there's more that could go into the identity policy and supporting this very use case, right? So, right, how do we? So then, if you go that way, then like, what do, right? Let's talk OO. You add a subclass now. The what did we call it? The GitLab identity policy to be the GitLab plan identity plan policy or whatever, right? Or you use composition, right? So now we can go into that rabbit hole, but I would recommend you use composition. And so that's what this does. That's the pattern that this applies. But I hear you, right? Because this one has a direct dependency to, like it even says in the target ref, right? To the identity policy because it needs something to feed it in. Now, this other stuff that probably identity can do that you would want to see in there. So you get the reason why you probably should rather compose than subclass, but hey, what do I know?
For example, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Is it possible, for example, here it says right now, for example, auth.identity.email verified. Is it possible that in the auth policy, you actually declare that as a thing and then use that in this policy, or that it doesn't work that way?
No, actually, that's a good point. So this actually one design decision that I don't think is captured anywhere, and I don't know that it's been made in any case, right? So where is that cell being evaluated? I could have this mapping function go inside the auth policy, set a field quadrant dot my plan dot plan, and then have the value in there be bronze, silver, and gold right away, right? Or, which is, I think, what I recommended we do for different reasons. Or the other thing you can do is just say, oh, yeah, this is why I don't like the auth identity too much in either, but it's like, oh, we need this, and this needs to be evaluated, and then that doesn't even answer where we do it, right? So now you can still do it inside the WASM shim, and then, or you can do it inside limited or. Today, the way you would do it probably is inside the WASM shim because all that plumbing is quote unquote done. Because all this is about, again, is meta policies, right? This doesn't really enable nothing new, right? As far as I can tell, both for identity policy and for this, we wouldn't need to change anything in quadrant operator, no, nothing, right? It should just all work. But how you wire it together is still open for debate. So I sort of half answered your question, but also in the sense that I don't think there is a straight answer to the question you're asking, right? Again, what the user sees there doesn't mean that this is how this works underneath, is, I guess, my answer.
Sorry.
Was there much thought put into creating a separate plan, like a separate resource altogether, rather than adding it into the pre-existing auth policies? And my thought is like, are we adding too much for a user? Like, in what conditions do you, not what conditions, but like, why a separate policy versus adding it to something that already exists?
I'm confused by the question on multiple angles. I'm not really sure which way I'm supposed to answer. So first off, there is nothing to add inside auth policy or rate limit policy. As I said, like all of this works. You just need to figure out how you make it work for yourself today, right? So this is nothing new. All that's there works effectively. Like I can do what's there today.
Okay, so let me change my question then a little bit. Why are we planning on doing it this way then, rather than not in the policy, in the pre-existing auth policy? Like, why?
It's almost like a template. It's almost like we give you a specific thing which gives you a limited set of things you can do, and with this one you can just do your plan, and you don't have to like read a book before you can actually do that same thing which you can already do in an auth policy. It's a level above it. Not sure. Please correct me if I'm.
Yeah, well, sort of the whole idea behind the meta policies, if that rings a bell, right? The idea is those are very specialized policies, higher level abstractions that are very precise in the language they use and what they're addressing, right? And they just get massaged and output what needs to be output underneath as we have it today, so that the user doesn't need to read, TFM.
Is this maybe surfacing another issue where our pre-existing policy is too complicated for users to use, and we're putting a band-aid on top of something that is there already?
So can you qualify band-aid and what you mean with this? Because I don't know what you're talking about.
Are we kind of, in essence, creating like a translator for our pre-existing auth policies? If I'm understanding we can already do this in auth policies now, but is it too hard for a user to do it now? And that's why we need this kind of plan policy to help interpret and allow users to not have to read the whole docs to do this. Are we just adding another layer of complexity, not even complexity, but another layer on top of something that could we make the pre-existing simpler for users to use?
Okay, so So one, just to be really clear, you cannot fix this only with the auth policy, right? You need to do the auth policy, do the matching rate limit policy, and orchestrate all that stuff yourself, just to be really clear. Today, it's multiple things that you need to compose in order to get this working. And then I don't know, I get very, you probably saw me, right? Complex again. I don't think this word means what you think it does. So no, we're actually building abstractions on top of layers that we have, where you do not force the user to go underneath to understand that. Right? So I always use the extreme example. That's why you don't write assembly, right? That's why you write Go, that you ask them to be like run inside a runtime, so that you don't need to talk to a CPU, like send assembly opcodes to a CPU to do its work, right? It's the same here, right? That's great power, awesome, but great responsibility, including learning how to use the thing. Many ways to run around with a sharp knife and cut yourself. And the idea is to build abstractions on top of that in order to make it easier for the users to achieve 80% of their goals. And then when they hit that limit, they need to go learn the layer below in order to get to all the power. So, and yeah, I guess you like whatever, it's probably worthwhile repeating, right? So users / customers, people that are trying to achieve things with this, have apparently asked for a custom policy SDK in order to achieve their goals. And then I saw some of their goals, and I'm like, well, turns out there's nothing missing. Like the puzzle is complete, and you have all the pieces to do it yourself. But it becomes obvious that the users don't see the light on how to achieve it. So I think building this higher level abstraction on top of it like addresses that shortcoming. Because again, I don't think that what we do is, that's not the core business of any of our users, right? They're trying to achieve whatever it is they do. And that like dealing with that complexity is just a side effect of needing to run stuff inside Kubernetes. So that's sort of the mindset in which I made the proposal that actually, I don't think we need a custom SDK. I think we need to provide better abstraction for people to achieve the 80%. The good news is that, it's sort of open source baked in. It's not really open source, but it's a bit like HTML, where you could see view source, right? It's a bit of the same here, because you write this plan policy, you write the identity policy, that in turn outputs an auth policy and a auth policy and rate limit policies, possibly even multiple ones, right? And you can then see what you wanted to do, how that was solved, get the actual pointers now into the documentation that you need to read in order to educate yourself and move further, right? So kind of self-explanatory kind of a journey or whatever. So I think it achieves a few things here. But so that was the proposal. And just to be clear, this is just an experiment of trying to sort of execute on that idea with a very concrete use case in mind. I'm not sure if all that answered, but...
No, yeah, that makes sense. I suppose, is the new, say, if this is implemented and we're documenting and we're showing users how to use this, is the new narrative that we're pushing forward, is that plan policies, quote, replace auth policies, and in terms of like you can do the majority with plan policies and you kind of avoid not avoid, but like if you want to go very in detail, you go auth policy, or how are we, like when do you use a plan versus when do you go straight auth?
So again, so plan policy, if anything, would replace your rate limit policies. I don't think they do anything with regards to auth. Identity policy would possibly replace your auth policy, which it doesn't. It just, again, it's a high level abstraction on top of the auth policy that becomes very precise on how to do example given. I have the hope that what we can do is have the OIDC policy I don't want to say identity twice. So OIDC policy that concerns itself with solving identity in an OIDC context in an opinionated way, right? So say you want to auth with, well, it's OIDC, I said. So I don't, was Google part of one of them? Maybe Google was part of one of them. I don't remember. Right? You could just simply put this thing in, you look at it, and you know about Google, right? Because you're a user of Google, and all like you use, I don't know, Google, whatever it's called, like we do at Red Hat, right? And you're like, oh, okay, I can just do that. Here are the 5 pieces of information I need to put inside this OIDC policy config thing, right? And all the rest happens for you, right? You don't need to educate yourself about the auth pipeline of Authorino. We just make it work.
Yeah, I think the idea would be that there is quite a lot of those kind of meta. This is just one example of a possible meta policy, right? Like, so the idea would be that we'd have enough of those kind of policy. And I think it's important to keep on seeing what the right abstraction level is there, of course, because that's crucial. You probably don't want 1,000 policies, but you probably want more than 10. I don't know. So the specific, like what level you do it in, but so I can also, for example, imagine, Rachel, that this is much easier to translate to the console as a piece of UI, as a widget, than
exactly.
an auth policy, right? So
yeah, because that was kind of where my question was coming from in terms of, like, that's a perfect example. Do we have, are the plan policies the form views that we now go forward, and auth policies are YAML only, like stuff like that? That's kind of where I was thinking on. If there's 2 potential, or relevant policy, whatever one it links to, if there's 2 potential options for a user to go with, how do they decide on which one is the best option for them?
yeah, I guess that depends on how many meta policies we'll have and what kind of how many solutions they give you, and like we have to figure it out by communicating with customers, like what is it, and over time figure out what the 80% use case is.
Cool.
I mean, it might even change over time, I think. So yeah,
cool.
that's the idea.
Yep,
So yeah, so it's kind of, yeah, so it's in a way our SDK is Cell. I think that I'm quoting Alex here, but
yeah, though, it's Cell. But I think one thing that, so as a meta goal, what I think is, once we have more like these, right? I think looking into finding a way to have this mapping function there not be as cryptic as what it is, and be easier to use. So I think as an example here, when I forgot how I called it, but like this m.filter that you see on the last line, you could get rid of square brackets and different things and have I forgot how I called it, filter by value, I think. So that you don't need to have all the, I don't know if it's clear, all the stuff that's going on inside this function, but so it becomes way easier to use, right? But today it's really hard to, like, is it a good idea to introduce this function that would operate on a map today, or do we need something else? You know, like, I think emerging an SDK out of use cases first requires us to solve more use cases, right? Then you can see the bits and pieces. Oh yeah, I need a hammer, I need a wrench, and whatever other tools you need to solve those problems. But if you're building a computer, a hammer and a wrench, maybe not the best tools in the world. Though arguably, why not?
Weird question. A target ref can only be one, or it can be multiple?
Can be multiple.
It could also be a mapping policy. Like you point both other policies to the mapping policy. That doesn't make sense, right? Many to many kind of.
Yeah, so on that point, I think that's a bit related to what Gus was asking as a question, right? And the way that it works. And maybe I read too much in between the lines, but it felt like somebody has been doing SQL in their life. And so where the foreign key lives, but I think it's better to think of it in terms of pointers, and then you make it work whichever way you want, right? So doesn't really matter. Put the point like the owning side or whatever it's called right on the side where it makes sense and how you navigate, which would have been my answer to how this came about, because we need the input from the identity inside the mapping function here in order to do our work, right? So I mean, to me, it sort of makes sense that it's that way, but I guess it depends on the mindset you're in. But to your question, what got me more is what's a mapping policy? Or are you talking identity policy? No, identity to plan mapping policy. Is that what you're talking about? Well, then
Yeah.
like every time we need to compose, we need to be explicit
Yes.
about it, which I think defeats the purpose, right? Because it's not sort of self-explanatory, right? Which again, if you do a plan, you will need to concern yourself with, and you see an example and you see it points to an identity policy, that makes sense. I want to do an identity policy. I don't know why I would be bothered with a plan, because possibly I don't care about that, right? That's not the way the composition works.
Yeah, but I can imagine that like all those specifics of the auth should be part of the identity policy, where they get defined into something that makes sense in the context of an identity policy. Am I still there?
Yeah, you froze for a bit.
Which makes sense with some variable name that makes sense in the context of an identity policy, and that you reference that here, and then you just say gold means super identity.
But that's what this
Silver
does.
means,
This is what
yeah,
this
but then,
does.
well,
Well, you could still, if there is stuff that bothers you, like the email verified, that you would want to have like, yeah. So we didn't get to make progress in the identity stuff as much as we hoped for, but the identity policy could be doing a whole bunch of massaging in order to get to email verified, right? That works too.
Yeah.
Like it's not ruled out, right?
Mhm.
It's so if you want to have, because the extreme to which you then go is your identity policy solves the plan name. I very strongly dislike this because gold maps to gold inside this thing, right? And the mapping now happens here, right? If the
Yeah, no, it doesn't have to solve for the plan name. It solves for the identity group name.
No, yeah, I get that. But then you get this intermediate representation, which is sort of a shortcut for the stuff that stands there. And you could absolutely do that on the identity policy. Oh, I mean, we never said it would be impossible to do, right?
Right.
The
It could even
massage.
be that the gold plan comes from an identity group that's created in an identity policy 1, and there could be another identity policy that actually gives you the silver group. I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud, but
Possibly.
huh. It's good. I like this, that we just like, you show a bunch of YAML and we can talk for half an hour. That's great.
Yeah, but again, I think we shouldn't try to boil the ocean all at once, and just go towards one working thing, and then dog feed it to ourselves, complain about it, and fix it and make it awesome, because everything is awesome. I saw it in a movie.
Any more questions? No, I don't know the movie. What's the reference?
Lego movie.
I think there were 2 questions in the chat there, Thomas, you might have missed. I don't think you're answered yet.
You compare it to creating a deployment, and Kubernetes takes care of bots, containers, etc. I don't know enough about Kubernetes to say if that's true. Anybody else?
Yeah, sorry.
But
Just
yes,
an example of the abstraction layer. I think it was when Alex and Rachel were talking, I dropped that message in, so it was kind of answered.
Right. Did that target an auth policy? Did what target an auth policy? The plan
I guess
policy.
the plan policy. The answer would be why not at this stage. Again, as I said, it's not a closed set, right? Is it a good idea? Maybe once we know more what's in there, because now all of a sudden you would have a sort of a pointer from a high level abstraction to a lower level one. My gut's feeling would be, sure, it probably could, but probably it shouldn't, because that's going to be a very hard tie then for the future when you want to evolve things. In order to break stuff at 2 different abstraction layers, I would, and from a design principle, recommend not to do it, but it's all mostly based on the gut's feeling right now.
Yeah, and there's nothing we can do to prevent people from doing this kind of things, right?
Sure,
I mean, you can attach a
we
policy to
can.
anything you want. We
Nope.
can?
Yeah, and we do today.
Right.
Like, it's not YOLO.
Yeah, and they're saying can see it fitting into some API management use cases. Yes, I guess if you want to build a developer portal, this is kind of the things that you also want to use for that, for people to sign up for this plan. But yeah, I can see that too. This is, I think, almost the closest we've ever been to API management within Kuadrant. This call is being recorded. Nobody watches. Say whatever I want. Okay, that's gonna be a lot of editing again. Anybody else has a question? Another thing to talk about? We're over time even. Yeah. Right. Okay, let's leave it here. Thanks, everybody. Take care.